In today's video, we're looking at the latest NHL Trade Talk. We're talking about teams like the Toronto Maple Leafs, possibly making some cap moves to keep some guys like Zach Hyman in the fold. Jack Eichel and the Buffalo Sabres appear headed for a divorce. Where might he be heading? And we're also looking at Nolan of the Philadelphia Flyers. Does he want a fresh start? Has he requested a trade? We also have updates on guys like Max Domi having a significant surgery and some other news as well. We'll jump into the latest coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Now, as I mentioned, we're taking a look at some NHL trade rumors today, but before we jump into those, we do have a few other news items to quickly discuss here first. We got word just a little while ago that Columbus Blue Jackets forward Max Domi had to have shoulder surgery due to a torn labrum, which the surgery was conducted successfully yesterday, but he is going to be out for about a 6-month recovery, so he will be out for the remainder of the offseason and the beginning of next season. He's likely going to be somewhere around 4 or 5, maybe 6 weeks late starting in the season. I mean, thankfully, where it's a shoulder injury, as he gets later into his recovery, he will be able to do some skating, keep up with cardio and things like that. So it's a little bit easier getting into shape. But at the same time, it might explain his lack of production and not so great season this year as well. Oftentimes, players are dealing with injuries that we don't know about, and something like that is fairly significant. So obviously, that's bad news for Max Domi and the Columbus Blue Jackets, but hopefully he can bounce back, you're working with a new head coach in Columbus and get off to a better start to his tenure there with the Jackets organization. A quick update as well when it comes to head coaches. It's been believed that the Buffalo Sabres might be considering at least one head coaching candidate from Europe, and that's believed to be Rickard Grönborg, who hails from Sweden, is currently coaching in the Swiss League for Zurich. Grönborg has interviewed with NHL teams in the past, and I believe the last time he interviewed, if I'm not mistaken, was with the Sabres when they hired Ralph Kruger. So obviously I know it's been a goal of his to coach in the NHL. He's obviously had a lot of international experience with Team Sweden, so it is a really strong candidate and a kind of a different approach too for them to be considering. Obviously, I know we quite often talk about a lot of the recycled NHL coaches that have a lot of experience and have had a lot of success in the past, but Grönborg is certainly a candidate to be taken seriously and just might be the guy for Buffalo, but we're still obviously a ways away from getting any kind of confirmation on that. I don't think they're going to rush into that because they have some other things to really to worry about here that might be more significant, which will kind of let us segue in to the next part of our video where we kind of get into today's trade talk. There's a lot of talk from Elliotte Friedman on his latest 31 Thoughts podcast that came out earlier today with some updates on Jack Eichel and the Buffalo Sabres. Now, of course, as we know, Jack Eichel has had issues with his neck and a herniated disc. He wants to have a surgery to correct that problem, which is essentially like a disc replacement, which is a newer type of surgery that has not been done on previous NHL players. And the Buffalo Sabres don't really want him to go about that to get the correction here. They would like to see him go a different route, and they're having a lot of issues on how to agree on how to handle his health and get him healed up and recovered to proceed playing hockey. So obviously they had him try a 12-week waiting period, like a rest period, to see. That period ended on May 30th, and they are expected to be meeting sometime, anytime now. I think it's supposed to be within a week of that date, so I would assume sometime here in the next few days to discuss the future plans. And Elliotte Friedman on the podcast today was talking about the fact that they might actually trade him sooner than later, and that we might actually get a scenario unfold here where the team that he's going to end up going to will be the team that makes the decision, or with him, of course, on how to handle the correction of the problem with his neck, and that they might have to be the ones that play ball with him either on this new procedure, or will Jack Eichel change his mind and go a different route for a different team? There's some talk about that as well. Obviously, the relationship between Eichel and the Sabres has been somewhat contentious. He's been frustrated for a few years now due to the lack of winning, the overall organization, just the way they're heading. And we have kind of suspected now for more than a year that he wants out, but it looks as though we're finally at that point where the divorce might be actually getting close to becoming finalized. It's expected here, according to Friedman, that when they do meet to discuss this further, that might be the outcome, is that the Sabres decide that they're just ready to move on and be done with this, and that the acquiring team can make that call with Eichel on how they go ahead to get his health in order, and they have his neck, obviously either surgically repaired or whatever they go about to do to have it done. So obviously the team acquiring Eichel, if this is indeed the case, is going to have some risk associated with it, and it'll be interesting to see if it makes a difference on how or what direction he ends up going in. And they even speculated between Friedman and Jeff Merrick if would he change his mind and agree to another team having a different way of correcting this and a different procedure that might be less risky, given the fact that he'd be wanting to make a good impression, start fresh on a new team. So we have to wonder there. But if that's indeed the case, Friedman suspects that we could see a trade happen sooner rather than later, was his exact words. Now, of course, the main teams that have been linked to Jack Eichel before, which totally still makes sense, are the New York Rangers, the Los Angeles Kings, and the Minnesota Wild. To me, are the top three. I know that the St. Louis Blues have had a lot of attention recently as well about possibly being in the mix there too. And I would imagine, and I've said this before, that just about every team in the NHL is at least going to check in with Kevin Adams and the Sabres to at least, kick tires and see what it might take, because it's not often you see such a high caliber star player become available. Another big key in all this is we obviously know that the Buffalo Sabres won the NHL draft lottery, so they have the first overall pick. So the other part of that too, though, is that the Sabres will now know all the other teams, at least the first half of the draft, where all those teams are going to be selecting. That's going to make a difference when it comes to talking trade. So as Friedman went on to say, obviously teams are going to be likely wanting to include a first round pick, at least one or maybe multiple first round picks, likely including this year's draft, along with some other pieces of players that could play right away that are already existing NHL players. So if they're talking to a team like, say, the Devils, who are picking 4th overall, well, obviously that pick is more valuable than a team picking 10th or 11th or 12th or so on. So if the Sabres go ahead and make this trade prior to the draft, they very well might end up with another scenario where they could get multiple high picks in this draft. Not only do they have the first overall, but maybe they get, one of the other ones that are really high as well. I mean, if you look at a team like the Kings are, rumored to be interested, they're picking at number 8. Then, of course, you get the Rangers that are lower down, I think around 14. Of course, the Wild right now, they're going to be picking lower again because they're obviously we're a playoff team. All those picks are going to have a different value depending on where they're located in the draft order. So that could play a role here in what we see, but certainly a scenario that he thinks at least that it could accelerate a Jack Eichel trade. So as we talked about before, the Rangers are certainly right up there. You have to think that the Sabres are going to be looking for one of their top young players in return, though, whether it be Lafreniere or Kakko. Could they get the deal done without it? Maybe, but as we also discussed and heard on the podcast, the risk associated with this surgery very well could lower Eichel's return. And when they're doing a trade and negotiating, and a lot of it's going to boil down and depend on what teams are offering. If you get a scenario unfold where teams are kind of trying to outbid each other, then obviously the Sabres will do better and they'll get a much better return. But if none of these teams are willing to bid as high as they previously were saying was going to be necessary to get a deal done, it's going to end up lowering his value, if anything. And maybe we'll see the Sabres not get as much of a return, which they really need to be careful with here. Obviously, they didn't do great on the Taylor Hall trade at the deadline, and if they're going to trade their star player, they really need to set themselves up for the future here, and obviously a poor return would be a major step back. But it looks as though the Eichel sweepstakes might be starting to heat up here in the near future, and maybe we'll get a trade with him done sometime in the next few weeks. Before we jump into the remainder of the video, I just want to pause for a moment here and acknowledge our channel sponsor, Manscaped. Top Shelf Hockey is proud to be sponsored by Manscaped. Of course, with Manscaped, we have a special offer here for all Top Shelf Hockey viewers where you can get 20% off and free shipping on all orders at manscaped.com. Now, of course, Manscaped just launched a brand new Lawnmower 4.0 trimmer, which is a fantastic product. They've taken the level up here, even again with the skin-safe replaceable blades. It's waterproof, it's wireless charging, has a travel lock on it, as well as a nice light so you don't miss what you're doing. So certainly a terrific product. Now, many people associate Manscaped with their trimmers, which is certainly kind of their top product, but they do have a lot of other great options as well, including what they call the Weed Whacker, which is another trimmer for your ears and nose. And they have a variety of deodorants and sprays as well, which also keep you fresh and are terrific as well. So certainly Manscaped has a lot to offer, and we certainly highly recommend all of their products. So check out manscaped.com and use promo code TSH for 20% off and free shipping. So thanks very much for watching that sponsored video. Greatly appreciate it. Obviously appreciate the support of Manscaped as well. Now, jumping back into the video, the Philadelphia Flyers are another team that's been mentioned here today. Dave Pagnotta of the fourthperiod.com is reporting that he believes that Nolan Patrick likely is going to be looking for a fresh start and may have already requested a trade. Now, we already seen him change agencies for who represents him, and it's believed the fact that he wants a fresh start and is looking for a fresh start with everything here. Of course, the former number 2 overall pick has not panned out to be the player that he was expected to be. A lot of that has to do with injury. Obviously, some of it, though, he may feel is based on how he's been utilized as well. But I think injury is probably the biggest thing, along with his overall health situation here. Apparently, the Flyers were close to trading him at the deadline. There were some talks, and it was the Vegas Golden Knights reportedly that were interested in bringing him over to their organization. Now, of course, the connection there is, of course, Patrick played his junior hockey for the Brandon Wheat Kings in the Western Hockey League, where general manager Kelly McCrimmon used to run that team and was part of the ownership group as well. So obviously McCrimmon would know Patrick extremely well and seen what he accomplished at that level. Of course, when he brought in Mark Stone, again, another player he was very familiar with from their junior days. So, McCrimmon obviously has a real good idea. Not to say for sure that Patrick would go to Vegas, but I would certainly consider them an ideal front runner, or somebody who'd be willing to take a chance on him, given the connection and the history there. But it's really difficult to say what a trade package would look like. But clearly, the Vegas Golden Knights, in my opinion, do need help at the center position. It's an area that they could be a little bit deeper in, and getting another young center like Patrick in the mix would not be a bad idea, of course, depending on the asking price. So I'm not saying he's going to Vegas, but it does make sense of why they would have inquired before, and it also makes sense to me now as to why they would, kind of reconsider having those discussions here yet again. But regardless of where he goes, it is expected that Nolan Patrick will be wearing a different uniform next year. Now, lastly here, I want to touch on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, there has been some reports that Zach Hyman has apparently turned down a $5 million contract extension, but we've also seen comments from his agent saying that that is not the case. Now, I do believe Zach Hyman will be a difficult signing for the Maple Leafs. I've seen some reporters say that they feel he's likely going to take a hometown discount to stay with the Leafs. That's his first choice, and I believe that to be a real strong possibility here. However, it's going to be interesting because it's rumored that other teams might be willing to pay as much as $6 million a year for Zach Hyman's services, and that's going to be awfully tempting for him if the Leafs are all going to be able to pay, say, $5 million or less. I mean, to leave more than $1 million a year on the table, if those numbers are indeed accurate, would be a lot of money. So, difficult to say what Zach Hyman does, but he's certainly going to have a tough decision on his hands. But the Maple Leafs are rumored to be looking to make some cap-clearing types of moves. Now, we know that Freddie Anderson's likely not coming back. That's going to create a little bit of a cap relief there because he's not going to be re-signing. They have several other free agents as well, many of which may not return. I mean, you've got Joe Thornton, Wade Simmons, they may not come back. Alex Galchenyuk may or may not come back. You got Zach Bogosian. There's a lot of question marks. Plus, they're going to lose a player in the expansion draft, which very well could be most likely either Alex Kerfoot or probably Justin Hall. I think they're the two most likely, depending on who they protect. But based on my projections, they would be one of the top 2 players that Seattle likely would have access to be able to claim in an expansion draft. So either way, they're freeing up a little bit of space just by losing a player, which is bound to happen to, really everybody, of course, across the NHL. So clearly, they could continue to make moves to make sure they find enough space to pay Zach Hyman. But if they end up having to pay $6 million to keep Hyman, you have to think that maybe they walk away at that point. I mean, they've already got the big 4. I mean, I know he wouldn't be quite at their level, but considering William Nylander's only at like 6.9, that's awfully close. I mean, he's a unique kind of player that they don't have a lot of, though, and he really does provide a great role. He's a heart and soul kind of player. He's a gritty kind of player, can dig out the puck in the corners. Really is helpful to guys like Matthews and Marner to help get them the puck more, to help them create the offense that they do for that team. And I think it would be a big loss if he indeed ended up leaving via free agency, but it's not going to be any kind of easy move. Now, of course, the other thing that came out on the 31 Thoughts podcast was that Kyle Dubas, apparently, we know he had lots of trade conversations at the deadline because he brought in a lot of players, many of which likely won't return. We brought in guys like Ben Hutton, David Riddick, for example, as a backup third-string goaltender. Obviously, they went out and got Nick Foligno and many others. Like, the Leafs were incredibly busy, and O'Reilly Nash, another one. So We know Dubas was having a lot of trade conversations, but it's believed, based on Friedman sources, that there was a fairly significant deal that he was having conversations about before the deadline, but was not able to make it work. Now, many believe that he's going to revisit that in the offseason, but we know a lot of times at the NHL trade deadline that GMs will have trade conversations, and if things are not necessarily going to be working out, if they can't work out for a variety of reasons, that sometimes they're just kind of putting things in motion for the offseason, kind of, getting some conversations ahead of time, kind of planting some seeds, so to speak. Now, I've seen other sources report that they believe that player that he was trying to acquire that was more significant was Rickard Rakell of the Anaheim Ducks. So would not be surprising if they revisit that kind of deal. But at the same time, we know that in the offseason, end of season media availability here for like guys like Shanahan and Dubas, like they talked about that lack of a killer instinct was something they want to address here. Obviously, the Leafs came out in Game 7 against Montreal and was kind of flat, and it looked like they were just, I don't know, they were missing that emotion where the Habs were playing to win and the Leafs were playing to hope they win or to not lose, which was a different mentality. So to me, adding a player like Rickard Rakell is not necessarily going to get you that killer instinct. I mean, he's a nice player. He could be helpful, especially depending on what other moves they make. If they lose Hyman, obviously Rakell's a guy who could maybe play a similar role. But, either way, he's not going to give you that killer instinct. So I'm not sure what they do to address that in that regard. But that is something that the team wants to look at as well. But will Kyle Dubas continue to have some of those conversations that he had at the deadline? Could Rickard Rakell be a player they target this offseason? And will they be able to get Zach Hyman signed? And what other money do they have to clear out to maybe make sure they can get that done? Let me know your thoughts on what the Leafs do, as well as everything else discussed here today in the comments, and we'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the latest news from around the entire league. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.